Welcome to r/Entitledparents, where strangers leave their kids in your car and expect you to babysit for free. But before I start today's video, I have a little bit of news. A lot of people have been asking me for merchandise, so I'm planning on launching a merch store soon. But to do that, I need designs. So if you're an artist or graphic designer and you have a unique, creative, or funny design for me, I want to hear from you. Email me at r/yt@gmail.com and hopefully we can work something out, because if I like your design, I will gladly buy it from you. Or if you prefer, I can pay you in exposure bucks, which, as we all know, is the preferred currency for buying art. Honestly, just writing this post makes my own eyes and fingers hurt. The fact that it actually happened makes me want to vomit every time I think about it. So why don't I start with a little backstory? About 3 years ago, I was 15 at the time, 2 friends and myself went on a small camping trip. The area we went to was about a mile away from a farmer's market that came every other Friday. Several of the booths there sold outdoorsy stuff. One guy even sold both homemade and antique knives. Being the teens that we were, and still are, we decided to visit it. Personally, I wanted to buy my grandfather a knife and engrave his name into it. I didn't get to see him a lot, but his birthday was coming up and I knew that he collects antique weapons, World War II guns, knives, etc. So after a short bout of convincing my dad, I went camping with my friends so I could shop the next day. Friday came and my friends and I walked to the market. After blowing a couple of bucks on food, I went to check out the cutlery. My friends took off to check out some other stuff while I shopped. After a few minutes, I managed to find the perfect knife. It was a large curved combat knife with a rainbow steel blade and an oak wood handle, as well as a leather sheath. It cost me about 60 bucks. Worth it. I put the knife carefully in my backpack and continued to shop. At the end of the day, my friends and I started heading back to the campsite. We were almost there when one of my friends told me that stuff was falling out of my backpack. I picked up what little had fallen out and stuffed it back inside. That's when I noticed the knife missing. I gave my friends my pack and told them to go back to the campsite and start the campfire while I look for the knife. Here's where the story starts. After a couple minutes of mild jogging and checking the trail for my knife, I noticed a woman and her kid walking towards me. I slowed down, planning to ask them if they'd seen my knife. Before I had even got a chance, I noticed a familiar shape in the kid's hand. I was nearly ecstatic. Then things went south. I stopped the two of them. "You found my knife, thank God. I've been looking for it forever." Well, maybe not forever, but what can I say? It sure felt like it. The entitled parent says, "I'm sorry." The combat knife, I lost it while walking up the trail. I hadn't zipped up my... At this point, the woman cuts me off. "Well, it's your fault for losing it. It belongs to my son now." In the moment, I probably looked dumbfounded. I had expected this woman to maybe laugh with me and have her kid hand the knife over. Not this. No, it belongs to me. I bought it. "And you also lost it. Finders keepers." I was astonished. How can a woman 3 times my age be so childish? Finders keepers is a thing kindergartners say. It's not a real thing. "Too bad for you. You lost it, so now it's my son's." The entitled kid was maybe around 8 to 10 years old with absolutely no experience of how to hold a knife. He didn't seem to even notice that I was there. Instead, he was fixated on pulling the knife out of the sheath, which was held in with some twine tied to a knot. Me getting angry, I decided to make a grab for the knife. The kid was unfortunately faster and backed up. Then the woman had the freaking nerve to actually slap me. "Don't you dare touch my kid, you little turd. You think you're so tough because you're older than him and..." I won't bother writing all of what she said here, but let me assure you, it wasn't pretty. I think even a few racial slurs were thrown in there, even though we were both white. At this point, the kid manages to untie the knot on the knife and pull it out of the sheath. I managed to see him out of the corner of my eye just to see his other hand rub against the blade. He instantly drops the knife and begins screaming as he holds his bleeding thumb. The parent turns to her child's aid, yet somehow continues to keep screaming at me. I once again go for my knife. The woman darts out and slaps me again. And then karma. She blindly tries to grab the knife so I can't get to it. Little does she know that the knife is freaking sharp. I had already cut my hand before I bought it. So in her blind grab, she wraps her whole hand around the blade. Once the steel bit into her hand, she threw the knife a few feet away. I rushed over to grab the knife and sheath it. I decided I didn't want to have to deal with this woman any longer and ran. I did look back just to see the woman holding her bleeding palm and still shouting at me. A month later, I had cleaned the knife, engraved my grandfather's name into it, and gave it to him as a birthday gift, as well as the story that came with it. The knife sits on the mantle to his fireplace as a reminder to everyone out there, don't be a grunt. The only thing missing from this story is when the guy went to go grab the knife after the woman dropped it, he should have said, "Finders keepers," and then run off. At first, I wasn't sure if this was an entitled parent story because I think this woman is just plain crazy. But after reading a few of these, I have figured out that crazy and entitled are one and the same. Years ago, this new neighbor of mine, she had recently moved to a house on the next street over, kept trying for the better part of a summer to use me as a free babysitter. It started when her kid, who was really a cute, well-behaved kid, about 7 years old, showed up at my door at 7:15 in the morning. We were all just waking up and getting around, so I told him that my boys weren't ready to play yet and to come back in a few hours. That is when the kid told me his mom had gone to work. This seemed a bit odd to me, so I brought him in and tried to call his mom. This was the time of only landlines. Sure enough, she was gone. So I brought him in and fed him breakfast. He stayed with us the rest of the day and he got along well with my two boys who were 5 and 10. I had only talked to his mom about 2 times, so I had no idea why she would think this was a good idea. When his mom came home, I walked him over so I could talk to her. I told her not to do that again. I told her that I would be willing to watch him on occasion if asked first, but not every day. Her response was, "Well, what else do you have to do all day?" This kind of took me by surprise. I tried to tell her that I work at home on commissions. She rolled her eyes and told me that being an artist isn't a real job. And besides, I was married, so I didn't need to work. I should have pointed out to her that she was married and working, but I felt myself getting angry and didn't want to argue with her. "Just don't do that again," I said to her. "You have teenage kids home for the summer. Have them babysit." She frowned at me and said, "They work." I said, "So do I." Then I went home. The next morning at 7:15, the kid sheepishly shows up again. Once again, I bring him in and feed him breakfast and later lunch. Once again, I took him to his home and once again told his mother to please not do that again. She actually tried to tell me that it was my neighborly duty to watch him, and I told her that if she sent him tomorrow, I wouldn't be there because of a doctor's appointment. She said that as a babysitter, I should have given her several days' notice about this. I angrily told her I was not a babysitter and then went home. The next morning, I made my 7 a.m. appointment. Blood work, that is why it was so early. I did some grocery shopping afterward, and it was about 10 a.m. when I got home. The poor kid was waiting for me on my porch. He had been there nearly 3 hours, and the little guy was scared and hungry. That night, when I took the kid home, I was angry. I told her how the kid was scared and alone. She actually said that she had told me I hadn't given her enough time to find anyone else and that his being alone was my fault. I pointed at her and said, "I am not a babysitter. Don't send him over again." That night, the woman had her adult nephew call me to scream at me for not being home when his poor aunt dropped her son off. How dare I leave a small child alone like that? I told the nephew that his aunt knew I wasn't home, so it was her that left a child all alone. I said that I repeatedly asked his aunt not to send the kid over anymore, and I was not a babysitter. This nephew freaked out at me when I said that, and I hung up on him screaming at me. This worked for 2 wonderful quiet days, then right back to it. I tried everything, but this woman insisted that it was my neighborly duty to babysit and would tell me as much. Finally, I decided that to solve this problem, I would just get a job outside of my home, and that way she would have to stop. I was too much of a pacifist back then. I no longer am. I landed an interview for a position at the local library, and I was ecstatic. I told the woman to keep her son home because I had arranged for my kids to stay with their grandmother while I went to this interview. The next morning, I drove to my mother-in-law's house and took my kids inside. When I went to leave, I found this woman's kid waiting for me in my car. She had actually followed me there and then put her son in my unlocked car and then zoomed off while I was dropping off my boys. My mother-in-law wasn't the most flexible person in the world, and she adamantly refused to watch an extra kid. I had to cancel my interview. I was livid. I toyed with several ideas at this moment. I could take the kids to her job and leave him with her, or I could call the police and Child Protective Services. I really wasn't sure how stable this woman's job was, and I didn't want her to get fired. And when I went to go call the CPS, I chickened out because it really wouldn't be fair for the little boy. Besides, I had heard really scary stories about CPS. In the end, I just waited for her to come home. I left the boy at my house with my hubby. I planned on doing a lot of cussing, and I stomped over to her house and met her before she even got out of her car. I shouted at her. I told her she was dense, stupid, moronic, and crazy. I told her that she had lost me my job interview, and if she sent her kids over to be watched again, I was going to call CPS and the police. I told her that she was violating my space, and if it took going to court to get her to knock it off, then so be it. She then put her hand on her hip, and in her most snotty tone, she said, "Well, if you didn't want to sit with him, all you had to do was tell me." I really do not know how I kept from punching her right then and there. This comment was so asinine. I turned on my heels to start stomping home when I saw her husband pulling up. Now, this was the first time I had ever met her husband. He worked at a job that only allowed him to be home on weekends. I can't blame him. I wouldn't want to be around her either. And when she saw him, she turned tail and ran into her house. He saw that I was upset and asked me what had happened. I told him all of it, especially the incident at my mother-in-law's. The poor man was shocked. He had been told that I was being paid, and he had been giving her money to pay me. He had no idea all this had been going on, and he was very, very apologetic over the whole thing. In fact, he apologized again to my husband when he came over to pick up his little boy. Finally, she stopped sending her kid over. Later, I heard from others that she was bad-mouthing me and warning folks about what a horrid babysitter I was, but I took that as a favor. I didn't want to babysit any other kids than my own, and I still hate doing so. I don't hate the kids. I love kids. It's dealing with the parents that I don't like. The kid came over only once in a while after that to play with my kids, after he called first to get permission. Exactly the way it should be done. I'm sure his dad had something to do with that because the kid only came over on weekends. This is one of a few stories I have involving this crazy lady. Her only entertainment in life seems to be seeing how bizarre she can act in this neighborhood. I'm luckier than my other neighbors in the fact that she leaves me alone now, and I'm very happy with that. Alright viewers, I have to ask you, if a neighbor consistently left you with their kid, how would you get them to stop? Because if it were me, if that mother left that kid with me at 7:15, then at 7:16, I would be calling the cops. And at 7:17, I'd be calling CPS. Okay, so this took place over the span of 2 years, but I'm going to try to keep it short. When this first started, I was 14 and taking Japanese and was also one of the top students. So a guy, the entitled kid, asked me to help him on his Japanese presentation. I did because why not? I met Entitled Kid in the library every lunchtime for about a week to help him finish it, and thought that would be the end of it. Nope. Entitled Kid developed a crush on me, but I wasn't interested. I told him that, but he didn't want to give up. He started telling me how rich his parents were and how he could get anything he wants. To which I just told him to F off. Entitled Kid ended up stalking me for 2 years. He knew where I lived, what time I woke up and went to bed. He knew what bus I caught, when I would get on and off the bus, and even knew my entire timetable at school. Naturally, I was freaked out, but it just got worse for those 2 years. Entitled Kid also mentally and sexually abused me. He was telling me how if I didn't hang out with him, he was going to kill himself and that it would be all my fault. I was young and scared, so I didn't want to go to the police. I was scared for my life. So for 2 years, I put up with him. Until I finally had the courage to speak up last year. I went to the police and they told me they would look into it. I also contacted the school telling them about his threats to kill himself, so they got in contact with his parents. Good God, Satan is real. These entitled parents are literal demons. After the school got in contact with them, they blamed me for entitled kids' mental instability because I wasn't dating him and I refused to be his girlfriend. They were saying I am selfish because their poor baby deserves love and he is too good for me anyway. Then the police got in contact with them. I was very fortunate as other girls from my school had come forward to the police saying that entitled kid had abused them too. And there was even evidence with screenshots, so the police had to make a move. They told the entitled parents about the abuse and he was put on the child sex offender list. They were so freaking wild. The entitled parents approached me and my parents after school one day and the following conversation ensued. Hello, you are OP's parents, yes? Yes, we are, and I'm guessing you are entitled kids' parents. Yes, we just need to talk to you about your daughter's false accusations on our son. I just stared at them in disbelief whilst my mother is fuming and my dad speaks up. I'm sorry, did you say false accusations? Yes, how dare she accuse our entitled kid of such horrid things? I'm sorry, how dare I? How dare you raise such a hideous person? Entitled mom and entitled dad stand there for a second before entitled mom gets really mad. It is girls like you that make this society so sensitive and easily offended. My poor boy did nothing wrong. It is stupid that boys can't express themselves and the way they feel nowadays. He just wanted you to go out with him and you wouldn't, so it is your fault that this happened. At this point, I am crying hysterically, and my parents are absolutely disgusted that a grown woman would speak to a 16-year-old like that. My mom said, "Are you hearing yourself? How do you think sexual abuse is okay? It is no joke, and you should have raised your son better. The fact that you are blaming my daughter for your son's actions just goes to show that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Don't you ever approach us again and keep your sorry excuse for a son away from my daughter." My parents then walked away with me in tow while entitled parents were screaming profanities at us. I haven't spoken to entitled kids since this all went down. He tries to approach me at school sometimes, but I just walk away before he can get to me. To this day, I am still sickened by the fact that they thought it was okay for an entitled kid to be sexually abusing girls. That he was just expressing himself? F off. Literally F off. I am glad that no one got seriously harmed. I just wish both entitled kid and his parents got harsher punishments, but maybe I am asking too much. That was r/entitled parents, and just a reminder, if you're an artist or a graphic designer and you have cool ideas for merchandise from my store, reach out to me at r/yt@gmail.com and hopefully we can work something out.